Okay, let's talk about this. So, this is something that I haven't really done directly before. I've talked about Doctor Who music before. I even did a top 10 Murray Gold tracks, which I actually did before the official release of Series 9 and 10, which means that there are now tracks out there that would have been on that list if I'd had them at the time. But in any case, it's been a while since I talked about it, and I really kind of wish I'd tackled this sooner. The reason I'm talking about this now is I just kind of dragged my feet with getting my hands on the soundtrack to Doctor Who Series 11. I have most of the other soundtracks, not all of them. There's a couple of the later Smith ones that I don't have, not because they're not good, but because it's mostly remixes from the earlier stuff, and I don't feel like shelling out the cash for it. But normally, by and large, I kind of jump on these things pretty quickly. But I didn't with Series 11. And it's not because I remember the music being bad. I just don't really remember the music, like, at all. There's plenty I remember from Series 11, for good and ill. But the music always just kind of flew under the radar. It never left much of an impression. So I wasn't really chomping at the bit to get my hands on and actually listen to the thing front to back. Now that I've done that, yeah, it's actually pretty good. But I also know why I didn't remember it that well. It is a decidedly different approach to doing music for a show like Doctor Who than had been done previously under Murray Gold. The new composer, whose name I'm now going to look up, and I'll probably still say it wrong, Segun Akinola, apologies. This new sound it's very ambient, and it's very situational, and it's much more intended as an undercurrent. Murray Gold, he kind of came from the John Williams school of soundtracks. You know, big themes, bold brass sections. You know, really identifiable character themes that recur and get reused as these characters show up again and as their arcs close and things like that. This approach now in Series 11, and I apologize, I'm not going to keep saying the composer's name just because I'm afraid I'm going to butcher it or forget how it is, and I don't want to have to look at my phone every time. But the approach here is much more mood music. It's much more undercurrent. It is not about, boom, theme for this character, theme for this monster. And in fact, pretty much all of the tracks are labeled either under a line of dialogue that occurred in a scene or like the setting of a scene. Pretty much nobody has a theme because, like, every version of in New Who at least, every version of the Doctor has had something that is unique to them in terms of the thing. Well, 9 kind of had to share his with 10, but then 10 got things like the Doctor Forever that was used just for him, and 11 had I Am the Doctor, and 12 had A Good Man, and you had these unique themes for them, and then most of the companions had unique themes as well. Rose had a different sound to Martha, had a different sound to Donna, and so on and so on. So to not have these immediately identifiable themes is a very different approach, and ultimately a less memorable one. But again, that's not actually a flaw in and of itself. It's just a difference in approach. It's basically the difference between drawing attention to the music and having the music play a supporting role, which is what it does now. But when I actually listened to the music in isolation, I was surprised at how solid it is. But it really does, because I tried to sit down and like focus on it, but you know, I have ADD. I was doing other stuff, and it would just fade into the background. And I would miss when tracks would turn over. And it's not because they bleed one into the other, it's because they don't have the hard starts and hard cutoffs that a Murray Gold track does. So even like I've listened to the thing like 3 times all the way through now, and I have a hard time remembering specific tracks, not because they left no impression whatsoever, but because the whole thing is just a much more zen experience, which as a general vibe is an interesting difference in terms of approach. And if they weren't going to retain Murray Gold, I think ultimately was probably a pretty good call, because if you bring in somebody that has Murray Gold's approach, then all you can do is say who wore it better. But you bring in a composer with a decidedly different approach, and yes, some people will still have their preference for one or the other, but it also becomes comparing apples to oranges. And you can go, well, yeah, okay, I like this one or this one better, but they're not trying to be the same thing. So maybe we don't have to make them butt heads and argue who did it best. So, and I think that's a good thing. It's kind of a healthy thing to have it be that way. And it also is solid enough that it doesn't feel like a downgrade in terms of the music. It doesn't feel like we are getting lesser compositions. It just feels like we're getting less showy compositions. And like I said, just not drawing as much attention to themselves as Murray Gold's tracks would. And there's a few other interesting things that they do. As I said, there isn't really much in the way of recurrent themes that get carried over episode to episode. There are recurrent themes within an episode or within a couple of episodes. So, like, related to the Doctor in both The Woman Who Fell to Earth and in The Ghost Monument, there's a really wonderful kind of almost mournful violin piece that I found myself, like, listening for in later tracks and not hearing. Because I thought, oh, is that the Doctor's theme? And it's like, well, it doesn't really come up all that much later on, so I guess not. Or like for Rosa, it had for lack of a better term, an oddly patriotic sound to it. There was sort of this solo horn that actually, what it really reminded me of was the music from A Few Good Men. Not that anybody remembers the music from A Few Good Men, but I was in it as a play, so I knew the movie pretty well. Not that I studied the movie to play the part. I actually stopped watching the movie to play the part. How did this become about me being in community theater? Anyways, it had that sort of I don't know. That approach made me think slightly proud military, slightly patriotic theme. But that didn't recur in a bunch of other music from other episodes. It was confined to Rosa. Here was one where actually the one time the music did jump out at me, but that was because it didn't work, but was not necessarily the music. Well, it was somebody's fault. I don't know it was the composer's. And that's the music for the Saranga Conundrum. So there is a track on the soundtrack album called Saranga, which is actually a pretty good track. It's one of the more memorable ones overall, I would think. But the thing is, it didn't work in the episode because the vibe of the music was completely at odds with the look of the quote-unquote monster, i.e. the music, and it wasn't just the music, it was the way it was lit and it was the way the characters were acting, was all very serious, but it looked like Stitch, from a Disney cartoon. So that was a case where the music didn't work, but it was because it was not properly integrated and it contrasted too harshly with another element that was going on. And again, I'm not sure that was the composer's fault, given actually how much it contrasts with the way the thing was shot and the way the actors were. I really have to wonder how much redesign did that thing go through between when it was conceived and when the special effects actually rendered it, because I have a suspicion it went through a redesign and looked quite different from what people thought they were going to be dealing with. But that's getting into a tangent. But it's a good soundtrack. I do enjoy it. It's hard for me to recommend as a thing necessarily to buy because, like I said, it depends on what you want. If you like a more ambient soundtrack, a more mood kind of music, it'll do you quite well for that. If you love Doctor Who music, as in Murray Gold music, it's harder to say. What I would say is if you go on something like Spotify, you can stream the album. If you've got the premium version of Spotify, it's right on there. Give it a listen, and I think a fair number of people are probably going to come away with the impression I had, which is, wow, this is a lot better than I had kind of assumed it was. I was going to say better than I remember it being, but the thing was I didn't really remember it being anything. But listening to it in isolation, I now kind of feel like it's one of the stronger elements of Series 11. One of the least showy elements, but there's nothing wrong with music playing a supporting role and just setting the mood as opposed to really dictating what's going on or announcing a character. Not that that's wrong either, but it's a totally solid way to do it. And if you're going to take that approach, this music does it really well. So if you, again, it's hard for me to recommend like actually paying full price for the album, but if you have access to it, I would recommend giving it a listen. I think a lot more people will find something to like in it than maybe they thought. So that's the Series 11 soundtrack. I heard it, and I wanted to talk about it. Have you heard it? What did you think about it? Do you agree with my assessment? Do you think I'm completely off base? Do you actually have a favorite track? And the one other thing I'll say, the current composition for the main theme during the opening credits, I do really like that. Like a lot. I really like that version of the main opening credit theme. But in any case, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's buttons and links. You can like and subscribe and see more stuff and help me in the algorithm in this, or support me on Patreon, or share this with friends, or there's socials and there's merch and there's like a whole bunch of stuff. Ton of stuff. Click on things. Or don't. It's okay. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. So until next time, this council is adjourned.